Welcome to the 2026 Plan B mock draft. It is as simple as it sounds, where teams cannot draft their biggest position of need and or the player they're linked to most. We did this last year. It was tons of fun, and it is meant to be unrealistic. So go into this mock draft expecting to just have some fun. Let's not waste any more time. At number one, this is the only pick I will not mess around with because there is a 0% chance Tom Brady lets the quarterback of the future slip out of his hands. So the draft will start at number two. And with the New York Jets, I believe the player from, in the last couple of weeks and months, they've been linked to most is Arvell Reese. Basically, Arvell Reese is off the board. There is no such thing as Arvell Reese for the New York Jets, so let's explore some other options. They're still going to get a top name, of course, with the number two overall pick, and I do think we can still address that defensive line, and this time, some would say he should go number two. I will give them David Bailey. 14 and a half sacks last year for the Texas Tech Red Raiders. He's just a freak off the edge, and he also gives Aaron Glenn someone that can generate turnovers, which of course is something that they didn't really have there in year one under Aaron Glenn. This year, they look to change that in a big way. At number three, we have the Arizona Cardinals. I believe the Arizona Cardinals have been linked either to a franchise tackle or David Bailey at number three the most. So that means we have to go a different route. And I do think, though it is not a big, a crazy pick here at number three, Arvell Reese. Arvell Reese, it might give this team a bit of PTSD as far as drafting a player that doesn't have a set position, but is just a freak at the linebacker position, a la Isaiah Simmons. However, I believe Arvell Reese is the better prospect, and I do think, despite not having a set position, him being able to fly around the field, making a ton of plays, and just giving that defense a wild card element next to Josh Sweat, next to Walter Nolan in that front seven could be very fun and entertaining. And again, in a division where you have great quarterbacks, Arvell Reese could be that X factor for this defense to give Arizona the edge. So Arvell Reese at number three to Arizona. At number four, we have the Tennessee Titans, who I believe have been linked to best player available on defense, whether if it is Caleb Downs, Ruben Bain, David Bailey, Arvell Reese. So we're going to go offense. Again, I know it's not the biggest, position of need, but that's what we're going to address. And I actually went with this player in my recent mock draft, but Jeremiah Love, number four to the Tennessee Titans, I believe makes a lot of sense. They reconstructed Calvin Ridley's contract. You bring in Wan'Dale Robinson. The wide receiver core doesn't blow you away, but with Alec Manor potentially taking another step, Tremere DK showing flashes last year, they could have enough to work with to potentially make a playoff push with a fourth place schedule there under Robert Saleh and Brian Daboll. So getting a guy like Jeremiah Love is the ultimate safety blanket for this offense. He can touch the ball 25 times a game. This is an offense that I'm sure is going to want to be a run-first offense under Brian Daboll. And Jeremiah Love, again, he is such a generational prospect at the running back position. I don't think you can pass up on him at number four, especially under these circumstances. At number five, we have the New York Giants, who I believe have been linked most to Sonny Styles. So he is off the board. Though he would complete this front seven with that dominant defensive front, you cannot take Sonny Styles. So now I want to look at the board. We could go wide receiver with a guy like Jordan Tyson, with a Carnell Tate, but that's also a position they've been linked to heavily. So I want to go with this version with John Harbaugh of Kyle Hamilton, and that is Caleb Downs. I know there's concerns about his health going into the next level with how he tested at the combine with his medicals, but I'm not concerned about Caleb Downs. He is the best player in this draft class. He should be number one or two on many teams' boards. The only reason he's not a consensus top two pick in this draft is because of his position and the fact that that position doesn't have a lot of value. But Caleb Downs is more than just one position. He's more than a safety. He is everything. He is the captain on the back end. And as we've seen with Kyle Hamilton, a player that, yes, he is a safety, but he can have such a large impact on a team that he should have been drafted much higher. Caleb Downs Let's not make that same mistake. Let's take him at his rightful spot in the top 5. At number 6 is the Cleveland Browns. The only thing I can say as a fan of this team I have seen us linked to is offensive line, right? Whether if it's a Monroe Freeling here at number 6, whether if it's a Francis Maui Noah or Spencer Fanu, we are taking all of those players off the board. It's a typical Browns thing to do, right? Just to stay away from all of your biggest needs. But at number 6, we're going to give Shedeur Sanders and Todd Monken some fun weapons to work with. We're bringing back Jerry Jeudy, unfortunately, and we also lost David Njoku. So that opens the door for some fun options here at number 6. I do think in this world, we go wide receiver. Personally, I would say Makai Lemon would be my pick, but if I'm putting myself in the shoes of Todd Monken, what does this offense need? We need that game changer. We need that X factor, the guy that could be the number one option on a play-to-play basis, and that is going to be Jordan Tyson. Shooting for the stars here, definitely, because he does have more health concerns than the other 2 top wide receiver prospects. But as far as watching him on the field, if he can stay healthy, he's a freak. Not to mention his brother plays for the Cleveland Cavaliers, so keeping that family in the city, I think makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. So hey, Shedeur Sanders, you now have Jerry Jeudy, Harold Fanning, Judkins, and Jordan Tyson. Let's go to work. At number 7, we have the Washington Commanders, who also, I would say, are linked heavily to Sonny Styles, but really just best player available on the defensive side of the ball. And Commanders fans, you don't want to hear this, but we're not going defense in this mock draft. I do want to say I love their offseason. Bringing in 2 edge rushers to definitely help that defensive front makes a whole lot of sense. They do need to address their secondary and maybe get like a Caleb Downs in this actual draft coming up, but we're going to stay away from defense in this one, and we will go on the offensive side of the ball. It seems as though we've missed out on a lot of the big free agent wide receivers. We were going after Alec Pierce per all reports, but that fell through the cracks as he stayed in Indianapolis. Tyreek Hill is still out there, but I think it's a very slim chance he winds up in Washington. And Brandon Ayuk, someone they've been linked to for years, seems to be on lockdown, and he seems he's going to be staying in San Francisco, longer than we would like. So, at number 7, we're going to address this position. We need a guy next to Terry McLaurin that could be the guy for the now, but also for the future, and also gives Jaden Daniels a lot of help. I believe that's going to be Carnell Tate. Keep the Ohio State bloodline in this wide receiver room. We may or may not bring back Deebo Samuel. So now, if we bring back Deebo, we can have a three-headed monster of Deebo Samuel, Terry McLaurin, Carnell Tate, and Jaden Daniels. I think that offense could be fun. They can get up and down and make a lot of plays. Also, put a lot of points on the board. At number 8, we have the New Orleans Saints, who have been linked heavy to Carnell Tate and really pretty much every wide receiver in this class. So we're staying away from the wide receiver room, and instead, we're going to address Demario Davis's replacement. We're going to grab Sonny Styles, too great of a player to pass up at this point, as he is now the fourth Ohio State Buckeye to be taking in the top 8. Insane team. Ryan Day, I don't know how you didn't go out there and win the national title, but Sonny Styles is your linebacker of the future. He's going to be the captain, the green dot of this defensive front, and too crazy of a player to pass up on at number 8. At number 9, we have the Kansas City Chiefs, who at this point, I would say they've been linked to Mansour Delane, especially after trading away your number 1 corner, and then also losing Brian Cook and losing Jalen Watson. They have lost a lot in that secondary, so we're going to stay away from the cornerback position. Maybe we'll address the safety later on because it is such a big need. But at number 9, we're just going to go best player available on the defensive side, and that is Ruben Bain. Look, Spags is going to love this player. He's a big, beefy defensive end that is highly productive, and he gets after it, man. He makes a lot of plays. Last year, that Miami Hurricanes team, they don't make the national title game without Ruben Bain commanding double teams and causing chaos on a down-in and down-out basis. So Ruben Bain at number 9 makes a lot of sense for Spagnuolo and company. At number 10, we have the Cincinnati Bengals, and look, they just need defense. Unfortunately for Bengals fans, we're going to stay away from the defensive side of the ball in this one, and instead, we're going to go grab Makai Lemon. I'm just joking. I'm just joking. That would be fun, and that would be the Cincinnati thing to do, which would just be let's just continue to add wide receivers to this room as if we don't already have enough firepower. Instead, we're going to address this offensive line. I know you've done a lot of work in recent years to address this. However, you don't really have that star player, so this doesn't shy me away from this selection. We will go Spencer Fanu, a guy that for Utah in recent years has played four different positions on the offensive line. So for an offensive line that consistently isn't great and doesn't have a lot of star power and also doesn't have a lot of depth, you now bring in Spencer Fanu, who can fill a lot of voids from day number one. At number 11, we have the Miami Dolphins, who have been linked heavily to Mansour Delane and this cornerback position, but we're going to stay away in this one. Instead, I'm going to go with the pick that I actually went with in my recent mock draft, which is Francis Maui-Noa. To get a tackle of the future for Malik Willis, I think makes a lot of sense. Under a new coaching staff, they're going to probably play conservative here, trying to run the football with a defensive coach coming over from Green Bay. Running the football, protecting their quarterback makes a lot of sense. Francis Maui-Noa to protect Malik Willis and give him something to work with, I think makes a lot of sense. At number 12, we have the Dallas Cowboys. They have been linked to pretty much any edge rusher in this class, as well as any cornerback in this class. So even though Mansour Delane is sitting pretty right now, we're going to stay away, and instead, we switched our defense this offseason. We switched from a 4-3 to a 3-4, and in a 3-4, you can never have enough fresh depth on that defensive line. And in my opinion, going out there and getting your favorite interior defensive lineman makes a lot of sense to fit the scheme for depth reasons, but also, again, you can just dominate with so many fresh bodies there in a division that loves to run the football. I think grabbing Peter Woods at number 12 makes a lot of sense in this situation. For Peter Woods, yes, he's coming off of a down season. Yes, he had a frustrating combine coming in overweight and they didn't test. The pro day will be big for Peter Woods and his draft stock here in the 2026 cycle. But as far as what we saw 2 years ago on tape, as far as what we saw early on in this past year on tape, he's a freak. He's a top 10 player on my board for those reasons. He is the arguably best run defender in the class, as well as being a great twitchy athlete in the pass game, arguably being the best pass rusher on the interior in this class as well. You just worry about last year's production, and you worry about the fact that he came in overweight, right? But if he can shore those things up by the time of his pro day and actually test and show these teams what he can do, there's no doubt in my mind he will be a first-round pick. And going at number 12 to a defense that he fits perfectly, schematically, I think also lines up very well there. At 13, we have a team that has a complete roster. They can go in a variety of different ways, but after this trade with Trent McDuffie, though they have been heavily linked to the cornerback room, you can pretty much go anywhere. So I will say that they have been heavily linked to the cornerback and offensive line. So we're going to switch it up, go with a position that we don't normally see them take, which is the wide receiver. This is the ultimate FU move. This is the ultimate, hey, come and stop us because we are going to light you up on a night in and night out basis. And that is grabbing Makai Lemon at 13. This is the ultimate Sean McVay wide receiver. Just like Puka Nacua, he is a very willing run blocker, but he's also a guy that can create a lot of separation for his quarterback to create a lot of explosive plays. So Makai Lemon is the ultimate, I guess, cherry on top there for the LA Rams offense. At 14, we have the Baltimore Ravens, who have been heavily linked to the wide receiver position. Luckily for them, all the top names are gone, so they don't really have to lose any sleep over losing all of these top-end wide receivers. But for this team, I think it makes too much sense. When you look at all the players in this draft class, maybe the player that reminds me most of a Baltimore Raven is a Mansour Delane, a cornerback that is long, physical. He is great in man-to-man coverage, and he's going to get in your face. That is a Baltimore corner if I've ever seen one, man. That is Marlon Humphrey 2.0. So for Mansour Delane being the number one corner to fall to a defense that's going to have a Jesse Minter running the show, again, man, it makes a lot of sense. I keep saying that same thing, but we're trying to line up these puzzle pieces here in this crazy world. Mansour Delane at 14 to the Ravens. checks a lot of boxes. At 15, we have the Tampa Bay Bucks. And basically, you just cannot take an edge rusher because they've been linked to everybody under the sun. And instead, we did lose our number one cornerback this offseason in Jamel Dean. Let's replace him. Let's get a Todd Bowles corner if I've ever seen one. Jermod McCoy, a guy that has a lot of upside, but he's a long physical corner, and he can guard the Chris Olaves, the now Carnell Tates of the world, Drake London, Ted McMillan, right? Guarding these bigger wide receivers that would be in this division in real life. Jermod McCoy is your island corner. So you pair him next to Benjamin Morrison, a guy who I really loved in last year's cycle. That sets your duo up. Again, you can really trust your corners and get after the passer if you cannot get an edge rusher at 15. At 16, we have the New York Jets, who are really, again, tied to Arvell Reese in the wide receiver position. So that kind of opens up the door for this team to go wherever. Previously, I had them taking David Bailey at number 2. So we addressed the defensive line. Let's address the offensive line. I'm going to have them going with Vega Ione, a true mauler in the run game. He reminds us of that Detroit Lions offense that Aaron Glenn was once a part of. So, hey, let's bring that over to the New York Jets. Let's set the tone up front, and let's run the ball a bit more in 2026. We are now at the half point of the first round, and I know we went through it kind of quickly, but on your screen I will scroll through the first 16 selections. So, hey, if your team made a selection, you could pause it, but I will scroll through as we move to the Detroit Lions selection. And for the Detroit Lions, they've been linked to everybody on the offensive line. So we will stay away from the offensive line. And knowing Dan Campbell, he's going to say, okay, let's go address the defensive line. We could go edge rusher, but I know they've kind of been linked to that position as well. So let's just go interior. Let's play it safe according to what you've heard. I will go with an athletic freak, a guy that reminds me of a Dan Campbell offensive lineman, a guy that is a great run defender. He's very big, so he's going to command a lot of double teams, and that is Caleb Banks. For a defense that lost Alex Anzalone this offseason, you're going to need as much help on the defensive front as possible. And to get a Caleb Banks next to Aiden Hutchinson in a division that loves to run the football, again, it checks a lot of boxes. I'm going to try and stay away from saying it makes a lot of sense. At 18, we have the Minnesota Vikings, who are heavily linked to Dylan Thieneman. That is the no-brainer pick. Harrison Smith 2.0, a guy that flies around the field, makes a ton of plays, creates a lot of turnovers. We're staying away from, specifically, Dylan Thieneman. So let's look elsewhere, and I think we can still address the secondary, helping in that regard. It just can't be a safety. I think getting an Avion Terrell for a Brian Flores defense, the most technically sound corner in this class to guard the great receivers in this division, like Rome Odunze, like Luther Burden, the hodgepodge there in Green Bay, as well as Amon-Ra, checks a lot of boxes for Brian Flores defense. And 19 is the Carolina Panthers, who've had a great offseason, bringing in Jalen Phillips as well as some other defensive pieces. I really like how they kept it simple, but also effective in their approach this offseason. Now, edge rusher, they've been heavily linked to, as well as offensive line. So what I want to do is have some fun with the selection, and I want to give them maybe just the best player available. And in my opinion, that is Dylan Thieneman. They're someone who, I'll say this, when we look at their playoff game last year, the reason they were able to stay in that game against the LA Rams was because their corners were so dominant. For their guys to bother Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua as much as they were able to was, hey, alarming, saying, in a good sense, where we have dominant corners. Our defensive front played well. Let's go get that finishing touch on the back end, that cherry on top, so to speak, in Dylan Thieneman. You can use him in the wild card sense. He can fly around the field, like I mentioned. And to now add Dylan Thieneman to this dominant cornerback room, man, that's scary for a division that could be wide open next season. It's the NFC South. What am I talking about? It will be wide open. At 20, we have the Dallas Cowboys, who previously took Peter Woods to fit this new schematic defense. And it's the same song and dance here. We just cannot go edge rusher or corner here at pick 20. So where can we go? We could go offensive line, but that's not really fun. We could go with a receiver if we want to just continue to add to Dak Prescott's arsenal. We can go running back, but I just don't know if any of them are worth the pick 20 selection. So I'm just going to go with a tight end. I'm going to go with a pseudo wide receiver, Kenyon Sadiq. Imagine this offense. By the way, back to back Oregon Ducks off the board. Imagine this offense. CeeDee Lamb, George Pickett's commanding the outside. You have Javonte Williams coming back, which you're going to rely on him heavy. You have an offensive line that I think is good enough. You have Jake Ferguson, and now you add Kenyon Sadiq, a guy that really played like a pseudo wide receiver last year in that Dan Lanning offense. Now he comes over to Dallas where he can play inline, he can play in the slot. He brings you a lot of versatility, and he is an athletic freak. So you can trust him in one-on-one situations just as much as the receivers that you're paying a lot of money to. So continue to add to this firepower. And in this world, you bring in Kenyon Sadiq and you bring in Peter Woods, two very athletic players, and I'll leave it at that. At 21 is the Pittsburgh Steelers. You can just not go offensive line. They've been heavily linked to Vega Ione, Emmanuel Pregnon, heck, maybe even a tackle like Monroe Freeling. In this world, we will instead grab a linebacker. Now, when I talked about Mansour Delane being a perfect fit culture-wise for the Baltimore Ravens, I think the perfect ideal fit for Pittsburgh, especially in a Mike McCarthy defense, is C.J. Allen. I've had this pick to the Steelers in recent mock drafts, and I'm going to stick with it. When you talk about a guy that is a violent tone setter, a guy that is the ideal Pittsburgh middle linebacker, he's physical, right? He is a dominant run defender. Makes a lot of sense. I know I think they're bringing back Patrick Queen. If not, he's back for one more season. I'm not going to let 1 year of Patrick Queen detour me away from taking the linebacker of the future. So when you talk about a Pittsburgh linebacker, C.J. Allen is exactly that. In a tough physical AFC North, Pittsburgh gets their tone setter in the middle of that defense. The same sentiment can be shared here at pick 22 with the LA Chargers, and they have been heavily linked to every interior lineman in this entire class. So, with that off the board, of course, we still don't really want to go offense. I guess Omar Cooper could be an interesting choice, but addressing this defensive front, of course, we know Jim Harbaugh lives in the trenches, I think makes a lot of sense schematically. Of course, Khalil Mack is getting older. We could go edge in this regard, but they also have been linked to a lot of edge rushers. So to play it safe, let's go interior. And my favorite interior lineman left on the board is Lee Hunter. Athletic freak, great at stopping the run, sets a great anchor, commands a lot of double teams, but can also be twitchy enough to get after the passer in a division that will have a lot of talented quarterbacks. So Lee Hunter to the Chargers. Book it. At 23, we have the Philadelphia Eagles, who have lost a lot of defensive players this offseason. Reed Blankenship, Jalen Phillips, Nakobe Dean, amongst others. So we could go defense in this regard. And hey, I think the position that we're going to stay away from here is the cornerback position. So when we look at edge rusher, we could go with Akeem Mesidor, a guy that is ready to step in from day number one and produce at a high level. We could go with a Keldrick Folk, right? But honestly, when you look at this offensive line and how this team is built, you have Landon Dickerson on that right side who is contemplating retirement. He honestly wanted to retire this offseason, but Howie Roseman said, I'm taking away the $16 million left on your contract if you do so. So Landon Dickerson is back for one more season. You have Lane Johnson, who's been dealing with injuries, and he might honestly be on his way out the door as well. So I think getting an offensive tackle or an offensive lineman honestly makes more sense than addressing the defensive front. And in this sense, you had Monroe Freeling. I know that he is a traditional left tackle. However, I do think he has a lot more upside than a Blake Miller. And to get a Georgia Bulldog, we know Howie Roseman loves his Georgia Bulldogs. And to get him for a year where you can mold him to be a right tackle, again, he loves Georgia Bulldogs. To get a Monroe Freeling at this point, you could mold him into your future left or right tackle at 23. Again, Howie Roseman likes his Georgia Bulldogs, and that is the pick for the future there for the Philadelphia Eagles. At 24, we have the Cleveland Browns, and I would have loved a Kenyon Sadiq at this point. saying that we lost David Njoku. However, at 24, we already picked up Jordan Tyson. I say let's add to this room. Let's say F it. We have a great defense. We don't need to add to it at all. We have an offense that, yes, we still need offensive line, but in this world, we cannot draft offensive line. So let's go out there and get Omar Cooper Jr., who, in my opinion, reminds me of like a Jarvis Landry vibe to him, where he's a willing run blocker, but just has that dog to him. You get Omar Cooper next to Jordan Tyson, next to Jerry Jeudy, Harold Fannin. Look out, Todd Monken. We got some weapons to work with. Let's go out there and put some points on the board, which we've struggled to do in recent years. At 25 with the Chicago Bears, and you just cannot take interior defensive linemen. So in this world, I'm going to go with a guy that can be a great edge rusher, and that is going to be Keldrick Folk. He is maybe the best run defender on the defensive front in this year's class. He's an older player, but he's also has a huge frame to him. 6'6", I think like 285 pounds. Out of Auburn to the Chicago Bears in a division that loves to run the football. Let's negate that. At 26, we have the Buffalo Bills, and they have been heavily linked to every single wide receiver in this range, whether if it is Denzel Boston, Omar Cooper, you name it. Buffalo has been linked to every single wide receiver. So in this world, we are going to go defense. And on the defensive line, they can use some help losing a Joey Bosa this offseason, who wasn't really the greatest. I think Akeem Mesidor makes sense in the fact that he is ready to go from day number one on a Super Bowl ready roster in an AFC conference that I think many would say is more wide open than it's ever been. So Akeem Mesidor from day number one produces for Josh Allen and helps out keeping some points off the board, especially in those playoff matchups. At 27, we have the San Francisco 49ers, and from what I have seen, it's been offensive line. Whether if it's Caden Proctor or Emmanuel Pregnon, these are guys that San Francisco really gets in all of these mock drafts, so let's stay away from that. Instead, let's add to this wide receiver room. We have a wide receiver room that has been riddled with injuries or incidents off the field, and we don't know the future of a Brandon Ayuk. We also don't know when Kittle is going to come back. So in order to stay competitive in a loaded division and conference, let's get Brock Purdy some help. Denzel Boston is a huge framed wide receiver. At 6'4", he's going to be great in one-on-one situations. He can kind of be your next Brandon Ayuk, but you add him to an offense with, of course, Jake Tonges. You have Christian McCaffrey. You have Ricky Pearsall on the outside, potentially Jawan Jennings as well. So things could get interesting here for an offense that is trying to find anything to put up a fight here in a loaded conference. At 28 is the Houston Texans. I think it is honestly interior offensive line or interior defensive line. So we're going to stay away from that, and instead we will look for our Titus Howard replacement, which is Caden Proctor. He is a traditional left tackle in that sense, but he's such a big frame, and I think he's mobile enough that he can play either tackle spot. But honestly, if you want to have him at left or right tackle, it's going to do a lot as far as the productiveness of wanting to run the football, which he's a great run blocker with now David Montgomery in the mix. But also as far as protecting C.J. Stroud and giving up a fighter's chance against some of these dominant defensive lines, that makes a lot of sense as well. At 29 is the Kansas City Chiefs. They are linked to the quarterback position. We're staying away from that. So we could go defensive line, but we also already grabbed Ruben Bain at pick number 9. So let's get our Brian Cook replacement. That is going to be Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. Spags gets another fun piece to play with. Someone who is a bit of a wild card. And in the MAC conference last year, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren flew around, made a bunch of plays. So in a Spags defense that is looking for any playmakers to generate some turnovers, you get Warren and you get Ruben Bain. So again, staying away from the cornerback position, I think this is a very good mock for you. Now, newly for me, the Miami Dolphins are here at pick 30. Every mock draft I've done, it's been the Denver Broncos, and this has been a shoe-in Kenyon Sadiq or a Jacob Rodriguez selection. So when I'm looking at the Miami Dolphins and the cap situation that they are in, man, we just need talent. We just need talent, and hopefully throwing these darts at the dartboard, one of them hit, or multiple hopefully hit. with this 2 first-round pick mock draft. For them earlier, we went with Francis Maui Noah. So we went on the offensive side of the ball in the trenches. Let's go on the defensive side. And personally, I'm looking at the edge rushers. We could go Cassius Howell, someone that reminds me of a Miami Dolphin edge rusher. But honestly, I'm going to go with my favorite one left on the board, and that's Gabe Akis. Athletic freak there for Illinois, made a ton of plays. He is a great run defender, but an underrated pass rusher, where he still had about double-digit sacks last season. So that from the Fighting Illini in the Big Ten, in a run physical conference, transfers to the Miami Dolphins in a division that likes to run the football. Again, Gabe Akis is going to be ready to produce from day number 1, and this is your Bradley Chubb replacement. At 31 is the New England Patriots wrapping up here, where they've been heavily linked to the edge rusher position, especially after losing a K'Lavon Chaisson. So we're going to stay away from the edge rusher. Instead, we will go linebacker, and they do need a linebacker in the middle of that defense. Jacob Rodriguez helps. He's a top 5 player on my big board. You heard it. I am that much of a believer in Jacob Rodriguez. I believe not only does he bring a very high floor, but an even higher ceiling. A guy that was America's Heisman last season, I would say, at least sentimentally, right? The Butkus Award winner, 100 plus tackles in like 2 or 3 straight seasons. He has the potential to be the next great linebacker, and you get him here at 31 for a defense that was just in the Super Bowl. Look out. They might be ready to go back to back. 32. We have the reigning Super Bowl champions who lost a fair amount this offseason. Tariq Woolen. You lost Ken Walker, the Super Bowl MVP. You lost an edge rusher in Boye Mafe. So for the Seattle Seahawks, we have to take it slow. We have to rebuild in any way that we can. And they have been linked heavily to the cornerback position. So we're going to stay away from the cornerbacks. We could go offensive line with a Blake Miller or a Caleb Lomu, or maybe an Emmanuel Pregnon. Honestly, if I wanted to be realistic here, I think Emmanuel Pregnon is the selection. But let's have some fun. Let's go edge rusher to really rebuild this defensive line. You could go R. Mason Thomas, Cassius Howell, but I'm going to go with TJ Parker. Physical, man, strong edge rusher there out of Clemson. Again, a lot of those Clemson Tigers are going to have question marks coming off of a bit of a down season. However, TJ Parker, I think, is a shoo-in for Mike McDaniel's defense from day number 1. But that's going to do it here for this year's rendition of the Plan B mock draft. Now, if you made it to this point, please consider dropping a like, subscribing to the channel. I want to thank you guys because we just surpassed 100 subscribers on the channel. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but as a backup channel, I thank you guys, and I love covering the NFL draft. I don't charge you anything. I don't run any ads. We strictly talk ball on both of my channels. So if you enjoyed, consider joining the crew. Also, drop down in the comment section below and let me know what you would have done differently with your team selection.